Welcome to part 5 of my series, Variations of the Krell patch. So we've had 4 previous parts, and I've taken a fairly deep dive into setting up and making changes to modulating the modulator with Todd Barton's original Krell patch. So now I've gone back to setting up the original patch that I had, but I've made a couple of changes, and I've made changes both to the original Krell engine, and as promised, I've now got it set up using a different module, but we're going to take a look at that in upcoming episodes. As first, I want to take a look at some of the changes that I've made to the actual voice that we're listening to, because I've made some big changes there. In particular, now we've added a quantizer. And so I wanted to go through how I've got that voice set up and some of the things that I've added into it that become useful as we continue to add to our patch. So I call this this is kind of my version of the backwards voice, and it's a voice that I created for these types of pieces that has some very characteristic and very organic sounds to it. And it responds very, very well to being controlled by these Krell-like functions. It starts over here with the double andore, and first we'll talk about where do the notes come from. So with the double andore, all it's doing is shooting out a triangle LFO that's kind of a medium rate fairly quickly, and then that is headed over out of camera view to our Doppler polarizer, and I'm using that polarizer just to set or attenuate the level of that double andore voltage. Then I'm using that voltage and sending it into a Doppler mixer, and that Doppler CV mixer's purpose is to allow me to then add an offset, and I'm adding that offset so that I can get that voltage to be not only the height or the width that I want, but also to have it scaled into the range that I want. And that's because from the Doppler mixer, I'm headed into an IntelliGel quantizer, and you can see the quantizer is just here on the bottom. So really that quantizer is just quantizing a triangle up-down LFO. And then that quantizer is what I'm sending to our sample and hold that is responding to triggers from the Krell function. So every time the Krell function hits the end of its fall, it sends out a trigger. Sample and hold grabs one of these note pitches from our quantizer and then shoots it up to our shapeshifter, which is now our oscillator. That's going to be our main oscillator. But I've added in a couple of things. From the quantizer, I'm headed into a buffed mult, and then from there, I'm headed into the sample and hold, back into another buffed mult, and then back into my oscillators. So some of you may wonder, why am I using so many buffered mults if I'm just driving one oscillator? But it has to do with what I'm going to do with this in the future as we continue. And then, of course, the other question is, why am I sending a triangular voltage to our quantizer and then sampling the output of the quantizer? Why don't I just sample a voltage, like sample a voltage from the double andore LFO, and then send that sampled voltage into the quantizer? And there's a good reason for that, and it'll make sense in the future, but I'm sure some of you have already got it figured out. Please feel free to pop your possible answers in the comments, and we'll see who gets it right. So then from there, once I get to the oscillator, I've got things a little bit backwards as I continue from there as well. From the shapeshifter oscillator, the first thing that I do is I go into a VCA. I go up into a Linux VCA, and I'm using it as an attenuator. So I'm controlling the volume coming out of the shapeshifter, and then I take that audio signal and I head over to an IntelliGel Polaris filter, one of my favorites, and I've got it in low pass mode, and it's tuned down quite low, and I've got the resonance completely cranked. From the filter, I head into the IntelliGel folder, into the U folder. So I'm already a little bit backwards, and I'm sending an oscillator to a filter, from a filter to a folder, as opposed to doing it the other way around, hitting the folder first and then filtering the output of the wave folder. But the reason that I'm doing that is I'm making use of the resonance in the filter to add timbral artifacts to my outputted folded voltage. And I'm doing this by cranking the resonance up on the Polaris and then using a negative copy of our Krell function that's coming from our Krell function generator, and that is headed into the voltage-controlled Q function on the filter. So what happens is, as the Krell function starts to come up, the resonance starts to decrease. So the resonance is very, very high when the Krell function is very, very quiet, and then it starts to decrease as the gain starts to increase. So you'll hear little flutters and little artifacts that almost sound like tonguing, and what that is the folder picking up on and folding the little sine waves that are added from our filter. And then, once I come out of that folder, I'm not done yet. I take that voltage and then I head over here to the original dope for low-pass gate that I have been using as a low-pass filter. So now I've got some timbral control over the high-frequency content of the whole of that whole voice, and then from there I'm going to a final VCA that gets its signal from our Krell function generator and then it heads on its way out. Remember to like and subscribe. Please consider joining my Patreon to help me make more videos. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.